not just listening as a background,
the kind of chemicals that start
but
to move through your
listening
body
like a meditation.
even, are much more tonic-oriented than toxic-oriented.
Frequency plus intent equals healing.
And you drop down into what we call a very deep state of meditation.
This kind of health-promoting strategy, much like meditation, this is an active form of meditation.
Music has really been an essential part of how I get through my day.
Transformational inner experiences.
Re-enchanting of the world in the real sense.
Sound actually shows up as one of the universal pathways.
That the music and sound do have the power to heal.
Hi, my name is Joshua Leeds, and I am so happy to have the opportunity to talk about this emerging field of sound work. Sometimes I feel like I could be on the Chamber of Commerce of sound, because I don't think that there's an area that does not excite me about this field. I don't come to the field of sound work with my own method per se. I come to it as a composer, as a musician, as a producer, looking for the deeper elements within tone and rhythm. And it was from that that I began my journey into what I now term psychoacoustics, which is the study of the effect of music and sound on the human nervous system. Actually, I've come to realize recently that it's very narrow to even think about just psychoacoustics in relationship to human beings, because we can think about it in relationship to animals, we can think of it in relationship to agriculture. We can think of sound and music as being a manifestation of frequency and vibration. And so therefore, since everything on this planet basically vibrates, and we know that resonance is really the key to how it is that sound affects, then the truth is that we can consciously use music and sound. What is it that is in music that opens us up? From this, I've come to understand that actually the musician of the 21st century is not somebody who just works from the palette of orchestration and arrangement and harmony and melody and rhythm, but now adds to that same palette the direct understanding of how to use those elements to affect the different pulse systems. By affecting the different pulse systems, we can create soundtracks that are conducive to specific activities. Now we can compare notes, and now there are clinical studies going on, and music and health and music and learning is a hip concept now. It's not one that we have to knock down the walls to say, hey, would you pay attention to this? Because people already love music, and that's one of the reasons why it's of such great interest to people, because there's no armor about it. All of us as musicians know that universally it takes down the armor. People open up their hearts, they open up to music because it feels good. And so to now be able to say, we are finding a way to be able to use music and sound in very application-specific roles, processes. Nobody goes, oh yeah, really? They all go, great. I think about music like chocolate. I love them both. And if somebody said to me, you know, we've just figured out that if you get sick and you go down to the best chocolate shop in town and buy 3 pieces, only 3, not 2, not 4, but 3 pieces of the finest chocolate you can find, and then take that chocolate and have 1 piece every day at 5 o'clock, and you'll feel great. Wouldn't we all go, fantastic? Wouldn't we all just go, how wonderful? Well, it's the same thing with music. It's not an uphill battle. People are totally receptive to the idea of using music and sound. And so what I have discovered, And what I've taken back into my producing after writing the books and doing lots of research and standing on the shoulders of the people who have been before me in this field, of which is what we all do. We stand on each other's shoulders, and that's how evolution takes place, is that there are basically 5 primary elements as a producer that I keep in mind. I have over 30 soundtracks that are used in clinics and classrooms around the world now. I'm a fortunate person. I've been blessed. I'm able to make my living creating these psychoacoustic soundtracks. And whether or not it's for pain control, or whether or not it's for neurodevelopmental issues, or whether or not it's for the classroom and accelerated learning, or whether or not it's for people that are recovering from surgery, the same considerations apply. And basically, this is what I believe are the components, the primary components, that I now have added to my palette when I go to paint with sound. Number 1 is intentionality. What do you want to accomplish? Who's going to listen to it? And what do you want to take place? What is the physical and the emotional and the mental and even the spiritual, although sometimes we don't have control of all those things, but what is the space that is most conducive to the activities that we want to take place? And then once we determine that, then it comes down to the use of resonance, meaning what kind of tones are we going to use? Are we going to use high tones, or are we going to use mid-tones or low tones, or whatever combination? Low tones tend to relax. The second aspect is entrainment. And to me, that is really, if I only had one tool that I could use, I was on a desert island and there was only one thing for me to do with music and sound to affect change. The easiest way to affect change on the nervous system is with rhythm. And that's called entrainment. And we're all encoded with the, even on a cellular level, we are all encoded to entrain to an periodic external rhythm. And we could get into a whole conversation, of course, about the nature of rhythm inside the body, the nature of rhythm in the cosmology of everything. It's everywhere. The undulation of life is everywhere. And through rhythm, we know that we can cause the primary pulse systems to speed up or slow down. I've been spending a lot of focus time on thinking about pattern identification and whether or not we want to create active listening or whether or not we want to create passive hearing. Active listening where the middle ear, the two tiny muscles of the middle ear are pulled tight, the 3 bones are working hard. We're at the gym, we are in aerobics in active listening. And active listening is another tool to excite, to stimulate. And yet if you're doing a soundtrack for somebody in a hospital, then you don't really want to have them in active listening. Actually, you might want to help them to be in passive hearing. Hearing being the analog to, let's say, seeing, and listening, active listening, being the analog on a visual level, looking. Looking and listening are active perceptual processes. And whereas hearing and seeing are more passive. You know, the brain is always scanning. It's always looking to find the pattern because we have so many things to do. The brain has so many things to keep track of, like, gosh, I hope I'm not drooling right now on the camera, right? Like, I'm hoping that my words are making sense, or that I'm talking loud enough, or that I'm making sense. So many things to think about aside from the functions of the body. And so the body, the brain is always looking to find a pattern so it can get on to the next thing. But if we use sound and random sonic events, which is another principle that Tomatis called gating, then it's another way for us to engage or not the nervous system, the brain. And so now when we start to put these things together, what's the tonal quality? What's the resonance? What's the entrainment? What are the rhythms that are going on? What's the pattern identification? Is it active or is it passive? And then to that I would add, finally, what I call sonic neurotechnologies, meaning sound technologies that affect the neurology. And whether or not they're binaural beat frequencies, or whether or not it's tomatis-oriented filtration and gating, or whether or not it's this wonderful new technology that is coming out of China, Qigong energy, that they have found a way to be able to actually dial up with sound, or whether or not it's the cymatics work that's coming out of England. We have the opportunity to take the resonance entrainment pattern identification, and as if that isn't strong enough, now add in a post-production phase sonic neurotechnologies, the binaural frequencies, filtration, gating, whatever. When you put all of those guys together, then now we have soundtracks that can have a very fast, potent, and efficient effect on the nervous system. And so now we have the opportunity to sculpt vibration, which has been done for thousands and thousands of years, but with a clear intention about it, an understanding of why we are affecting. And that's how I started my journey. How and why? Why do some things affect differently? And now I'm 15, 20 years into it and just beginning to understand it. And the more that I understand it, the more that I see that this is a fantastic field. And I welcome anybody who is called by Apollo to do this work. So Alfred Tomatis, who passed away in 2001 at the ripe old age of 81, will come to be known as the father of modern day psychoacoustics. And when I talk about psychoacoustics, then I'm thinking far beyond sound healing, because that's too limiting as far as I'm concerned. We can use music and sound to enhance human function. We can use it to affect what already works well and help it to work even better. In other words, sound becomes a tremendous tool of human potential. And yes, healing is a part of it, but it's not the only part of it. The full, broad process of using sound is about how do we enhance human function. Tomatis to psychoacoustics is like Freud to psychoanalysis. He's the one, it's not perfect. His theories, people have some questions, considerations about them. They wonder about some of the science involved in his theories, but what they do know is that his bottom line, that sound is a nutrient for the nervous system, really cannot be argued with. And so if we just use that one extraordinary concept, so simple and yet at the same time so extraordinary, sound is a nutrient for the nervous system. Then from there we start to understand the role of the auditory mechanism in being able to take in sound, how important this is for taking in the nutrients, just like how important this is for being able to take in the nutrients of food. So Tomatis, amongst many things, developed a system, his method, the Tomatis method, that is utilized in over 250 centers around the world. Most of them, interestingly enough, in Europe because of the FDA. All right. However, like so many extraordinary things that are being used around the world, the Tomatis work, sometimes referred to as sound stimulation, is finding its way into American practice. Speech and language pathologist, audiologist, occupational therapist, psychologist, doctors, psychiatrists are beginning to understand that the role of the auditory mechanism is so important. One of the things that Tomatis came to understand is when there is a neurodevelopmental issue known that we could refer to as auditory sequential processing, the ability to remember a sequence of tones. Da 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 dum. That's a sequence of tone, and so for me to go, okay, what was that I just did? Oh, da 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 dum is a sequence of tones, auditory sequential processing, and it is one of the foundations of short-term memory. Short-term memory is one of the foundations of thinking. When there's a neurodevelopmental issue, quite often, short-term thinking, auditory sequential processing is challenged. it's hampered, it's not working quite right. Tomatis came to understand that there was a direct relationship between auditory sequential processing, which is a neocortex issue, and auditory tonal processing, which is the ability to distinguish between two tones, higher or lower. Ah, ah. Second tone is higher. Ah, ah. Second tone is lower. Auditory tonal processing is a middle ear issue. And what he discovered was there was a way to actually remediate middle ear function that would be like putting a key in the lock to open up dealing with auditory sequential processing. Now this is quite extraordinary because I've had the opportunity I was involved in the development of a Tomatis derivative called the Listening Program in 1999. And I was on the training team of 600 professionals. And when I would discuss with them, why are you here? They would always say to me, we have come to understand that there is somehow a link between what is going on in the brain and what is going on in the auditory channel. And Tomatis found that by doing two things, by filtering sound, gradually taking out the lowest frequencies in a soundtrack, and by also doing something that he calls gating, that I call random sonic events, meaning that the brain can't find the pattern because something happens in the soundtrack that disturbs the pattern. It causes the three tiny bones, the ossicles in the middle ear, and the two tiny muscles to stay in an active phase. It's like sending the middle ear to the gym. That's the reason why it's been called aerobics. The idea of taking that function and giving it exercise. And by giving it exercise, it allows for a greater spectrum of sound, for us to take in a fuller spectrum of sound. Connect that in with sound being a nutrient for the nervous system, and you start to see the linkage of all of these things. If somebody has got a funky middle ear function, it very possibly will show up in a neurodevelopmental issue. Is that a learning problem? Is it an attention problem? Is it a stuttering problem? Is it an autistic issue? Is it a memory issue? Is it a connection between muscle and movement? All of these things, if you were to say to somebody, these things all have a relationship with the ear, I am a great proponent for moving sound out of the context of just being healing. Because, number one, there is the issue of what is healing. What does that mean, to heal? Can anybody heal somebody else? I could never say that my music, or for that matter, that anybody else's music is going to heal somebody. I think the best thing that we can say is, how do we create soundtracks for health that will create an environment that is conducive to somebody's own self-healing? In other words, how do we help them along? How do we create the environment? And even though I am always looking for ways to work outside of the realm of music and healing, it's interesting that I find myself being pulled back into that arena quite often. And so over the last number of years, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this concept of sound as a nutrient. And I also found myself in a situation where I had a health issue. And this health issue at times made me feel like I was wearing my nerves on the outside of my skin. I was in a lot of pain. And I found that the more that I was troubled with pain, the less energy I had to give to external perceptual processes. When somebody gets really sick, they put them in a room and they even pull down the blinds, because even light is too much for the immune system to take in. And I became aware of the fact that when somebody has a chronic condition, it's very difficult to take in a lot of sound. But yet, if we accept the fact that sound is a nutrient for the nervous system, people that gets sick needs sound more than anybody. And so I spent a bit of time just mulling this over. I needed to find a way to be able to offer sound in a way that they could be assimilated. And I have a real love for classical music because I just find it to be, it's just a perfect form of music. And so people love the music of Mozart or Beethoven or Chopin or Schumann or Vivaldi, any of the wonderful geniuses that lived a couple hundred years ago. And I started to think what it would take to be able to create very safe soundtracks. When I say safe, where people just could, like a blankie. I want my blankie, you know. It's like, I want to just wrap myself in this musical soundtrack, like a favorite blanket. What would it take to create that whereby it would be simple enough that, like a food that was perfect to help heal, to help support the process of healing? What kind of sound would do that? And I ended up evolving something that I call simple sound. It's not a new concept. It's just the way that I happen to have put it together, which is, how do we take sound and reduce the complexity of the harmonics, of the melody, of the harmonic content? The auditory system is so curious. It deciphers everything in sound. So if you have a symphonic score, which I adore, but nonetheless, it's making the auditory system work very hard. And if the auditory system has to work hard, it's taking away energy from the immune system, or it's calling upon the nervous system to give up energy that it might not want to give up because it's using it to heal. And so I began to simplify orchestrations. I then began to also work with this process of complexity in terms of active listening versus passive hearing. And so again, making sound simple, like a beautiful flute just by itself, is so much easier to take in than if you're listening to, let's say, a woodwind ensemble. Solo instruments became a focus for me because it's easy. The auditory system doesn't have to work hard to delineate. But then I realized that it was also possible to be able to add to that. And I went from solo instruments to duos and to trios. And I created the Apollo Ensemble. But the truth of the matter is that really it's the most simple things that really have an effect, have a deep, deep effect. And for me now, 20 years into this field, this is what I had come to know. Music is simple. And if we take all the complexities of music that we've gone to conservatories to study and we've read about and played for thousands of hours, if we take that and we bring it down to its essence, chances are it will have a more profound effect on the nervous system than the fanciest lick that we can play or the most extraordinary arrangement. I think that sometimes less is more. And for me, essential sound is a journey into the process of creating effective, potent, powerful soundtracks that aid people in their own self-healing. Vibroacoustics, the consideration of the application of sound directly onto the body, seems to be moving forward in a wonderful way. One of those areas is around the use of bone conduction. We know that sound moves 13 times faster through a direct application with bone than it does through air. And the Tomatis people, for a long time, have been using the application onto the bone as opposed to just into the ear as a way of being able to prepare the nervous system for what it is that's going to then be coming in through the headphones. An area that is just reporting results very recently in the last month is about the use of focused ultrasound in relationship to the treatment of prostate cancer or in conditions of the liver. So as we can see, the therapeutic applications of music and sound continue to deepen. Don Campbell and a number of other people are doing very interesting work on the use of music and sound as an ambient force within hospitals. And this to me is a wonderful thing because, as we know, when you go into a hospital setting, the noise pollution does not necessarily contribute to the quickest level of healing. Politics makes strange bedfellows, as we know. The fact that the HMOs now basically are running so much of what's taking place in hospital care, they're saying if we can get people out of intensive care faster, if we can get people released from the hospital a day or two earlier, then it's not so much whether or not the American Medical Association thinks that it's the loveliest idea. It's about the fact that if we know that acupuncture, 3,500-year-old therapeutic force, can help people to leave a hospital quicker, then the HMOs, the accountants running it with their bean counting and with keeping track of spreadsheets and money, they're saying, you know what? Acupuncture is good with us, guided imagery is good with us, music therapy is good with us. And so interestingly enough, money has served as an issue to bring in these alternative considerations into hospital care, even though the AMA or the FDA may be going, well, we're not so sure about that 3,500-year-old treatment called acupuncture. The research that is taking place is daunting to keep track of because, interestingly enough, there is so much of it. What I have noticed as I've been accumulating research is the work that, Europe, these guys have got it going on there. And the work about music and the heart and music in the coronary context, one of the things that I was just understanding is that as far back as 1918, people were beginning to research the effect of tones and increased pulse rate and lowered blood pressure. So this goes way back, but the difference is that now that we've got the high-tech imaging systems, now that we've got the PET scans and the MRIs and that kind of thing that can actually measure it within the brain and within the organs, then there is an increased level of activity in terms of what's taking place with research. A lot of it around heart and cardiac. There is a study that came out about the effect of rosary prayer and yoga mantras on autonomic cardiovascular rhythms. And how interesting is that people would begin to study literally the effect of entrainment through a vocal level of counting rosary beads or yoga mantras and seeing that there is an actual autonomic cardiovascular response to that. There's an interesting study about arrhythmia and electrophysiology, dynamic interactions between musical, cardiovascular, and cerebral rhythms in humans that has just come out. There's a pilot study of patients in post-operative cardiac surgery. The idea of music for stress and anxiety reduction in coronary heart disease patients. Music for pain relief. A study that just was published by Scientific American in June of 2009, very recent, about new research explains music's power over human emotions and its benefits to our mental and physical well-being. The idea of medicine and music, the use of specially designed music in intensive care sections run by the Danish State Hospital. As you can see, this just keeps on going on and on. One of the people here in America who is currently doing extraordinary research, there are actually two people that I'd like to speak about. One of them is Michael Taut, T-H-A-U-T. He's a professor at a university in Colorado. And he is doing absolutely extraordinary work on Parkinson's and sound. The effect of sound in an entrainment function Somebody else who's doing quite extraordinary research is John Bilyeu. He's been working with SUNY, the State University of New York, and their different facilities to be able to study what is going on a molecular level with sound. And I highly encourage anybody who's interested in understanding this to go directly to the websites of John Bilyeu to be able to understand this. But it is about the effect of sound on nitric oxide. And it has to do with the puffing action of the nitric oxide molecule, and how at times when our health is diminished, the puffing mechanism, if I'm understanding this research correctly, is weakened. And that what their research has shown is by the applications of different kinds of sound and or music, that they are able to actually recalibrate the puffing mechanism that takes place within the nitric oxide molecule. And so it's a marvelous time in our field because we get to be able to not only experience the left brain intuitive process of toning and bells and bowls and rhythm and singing and dancing and movement, but we also have the opportunity to see how it is the direct application of highly precise frequencies on the nervous system. Cymatics and the cymoscope that has been developed by John Reed out of England, and how we're able to see images that continue to reinforce the fact that sound on particles, which was explored by Hans Jenny back in the 50s and in the 60s, that has now been taken by Emoto out of Japan, where they're able to show the effect of sound frequencies on water, the work of John Reed and other people in the cymotherapy and cymatics area has brought forth extraordinary images. So the consideration of frequency and how we use frequency, whether or not it's an ultrasound or whether or not it's in our own toning or whether or not it's in our awareness of the sound environment in our homes, in relationship to our children, in relationship to our animals, in relationship to what happens with an overwhelmed, chronically overwhelmed nervous system from too much stimulation. And what is the effect of that on a diminished immune function? This, for me, is a very focused area of my work now. Sensory integration. If we know that frequency comes into all of our sensory organs, how is it that it is affecting us? When is it too much? What is the effect of a nervous system that is constantly bombarded with a level of sensory data that it turns into sensory overload? We see that a lot in children and adults that are either overly sensitive or hypersensitive, or children and adults who have got some kind of neurodevelopmental issue. People in the autistic spectrum can actually hear the sound of electricity in the walls. We can't hear it, but they can. So they're surrounded with that all the time. And it must be terrible because they can't turn it off, because we're surrounded by high-frequency wires, Wi-Fi, cellular frequencies, all the time. Now, in our threshold, in a normal context of what we consider to be a broad normal range, we don't hear it. But what is the effect of it, even though we don't hear it, on our nervous system? What happens when we are chronically overwhelmed on a sensorial level, whether or not it's auditory, olfactory, visual, kinesthetic? Where is it that the overwhelm of our nervous system, by having too much data to process, translates into a diminished immune function. And for me, this is now the thrust of my work in sound, is to be able to help people to understand the necessity of the creation of sound environments that are conducive to health and well-being. Sensorial environments, to take it a step further, that are conducive to health and well-being.
I'm Donna Carey, and I'm a licensed acupuncturist and herbalist, and one of the co-creators of the Acutonic System of Healing and Education. And I'm also a co-founder of Kairos Institute of Sound Healing and of the International Institute of Harmonic Living. And I didn't say I'm also a poet, which is one of my deep passions and loves.
I'm Ellen Franklin, and I work with Donna to co-create and further develop the Acutonics Healing System. We co-founded the International Institute of Harmonic Living, a new not-for-profit that's really focused on science, sustainability, and spirituality. And we both provide teaching of the Acutonics Healing System. I came to sound through an extraordinary experience that really transformed my life, and was critically ill, a real classic type A senior executive in the toy industry. Some people say I still work with toys, but we think of them as healing tools. And I was quite ill, and someone kept saying, you should go for acupuncture, you should go for acupuncture. And I'd had a challenging experience with an acupuncturist in the past and didn't really feel that I could go. And I reached a point where I was so ill that I finally went to see Donna Carey. And I had 3 treatments with her, and at that time, it's about 15 years ago, she was working with planetary gongs, these exquisite planetary gongs, and an earlier version of tuning forks and acupuncture needles. And I found working with sound to be so life-altering, so transformational, that I left a career in corporate America to work more closely with Donna and to help further develop her work with the Acutonic system.
I got into sound healing, at least the field of acutonics and the larger field of harmonic medicine, after a near-death experience. And I actually heard the music of the spheres. And after that, having come back, I knew I had to come, I was back for a reason. And all of a sudden, I started having information about things I never knew about. In sound, with the planets, Johannes Kepler, things that I had never really studied, that I had just immediate knowledge of. And so then I went on to start to experiment with that, and knew in my healing practice that I had to start bringing these sounds, these celestial harmonies, into the terrestrial milieu. And so I started using tuning forks instead of acupuncture needles, and I started using bowls, but I was probably one of the first people to own a full set of these planetary gongs. And I started working with those and integrating sound more and more into my practice, and seeing the quantum results in my clients and my patients. And it was something that was so profound that I knew that I would never probably use needles again, even though I went on to become the clinical dean of an acupuncture school, probably one of the largest in the country. But so that was my personal experience with sound. And I think I was always very sound conscious, being a poet. So, planetary gongs and the tuning forks are actually based on the orbital frequencies of the planets as they rotate around the sun. And so it connects us back with nature and the cycles of nature. And it was a very strong dovetail for me, having studied Oriental medicine, because it's all about cycles and about the macrocosm versus the microcosm, or as Chuang Tzu said, heaven, earth, and I are one, and all things and I form an inseparable unity. And so that connection was there for me. And then these planetary velocities, which Kepler calculated in, I believe, 1620. Yeah. In last century, a Swiss mathematician, Hans Cousteau, then used mathematical formulas to convert those planetary rotations and velocities into musical tones in terms of hertz. And then we have raised them up 25 to 35 octaves so that they're in the mid-range of human hearing. And we have some that are mid-range, some that are a little higher, and some that are a little lower. But the planets, what they do is connect us to a vast palette of knowledge from the ancient medical traditions of the West and the East. And so we're dealing with sympathies and correspondences. And sympathy is likeness. It's what our modern physics is talking about in terms of string theory. You pluck something here and it resonates and is received somewhere else. So by working with these frequencies, we tune in to all of these resonances. And sympathy at the core, what is it? It's love. And just for an example, we'll pick our planet of love, which is Venus. But there's ancient associations with Venus as ruling the thyroid and parathyroid glands, being associated with the heart and the kidneys. And since she's very feminine and a very feminine archetype, we use Venus for any kind of hormonal imbalances, any type of thyroid imbalances, any type of urinary bladder imbalances, because she also rules the bladder and the kidneys. And on the other hand, her partner Mars rules the adrenal glands. So when we get that very yang energy, that's the adrenal rushing, and Mars rules the head. Mars also rules the immune system. So because it's our warrior archetypally, just like she is our goddess of love and beauty. So they form a perfect balance. And actually in music, they form a perfect fifth. And nature did that. These are the cosmological cycles. This is cosmic music, not chromatic music, not A440. This is the matriarchal system of cooperation and unity.
We were really driven by this understanding of the cosmic music or harmonies, and that is really what drove the development of our whole system of healing. And so that we work with the frequencies of the earth, moon, sun, and planets in all of our tuning forks. We also work with high, middle, and low frequency tuning forks. And conceptually there, what we're doing is we're accessing the body on many different levels. And in our work and in our teachings, we talk a lot about heaven, earth, and humanity, as above, so below. And by working on these multiple layers or levels of energy, we're really able to connect the individual to the cosmic harmonies, the macrocosm and the microcosm, and bring them together. And it's really, for us, the idea of working with these frequencies and how we've seen them borne out clinically has been really powerful. For example, Donna talked a little about Mars and Venus, but I like to talk about the sun, the center of our universe. It gives us warmth and heat and sustenance and makes things grow. And clinically, we would work with the sun in the same way. We would use the sun to work perhaps with seasonal affect disorder, with depression, with people who need more nourishment in their physical body. The sun is very yang, brings more energy, more life into the body. And so again, working cosmically, working with something that we understand on a psycho-spiritual level, as well as something that we understand in our heart.
We know these tones. This is part of our family, these system of planets, and we know these in our hearts, and we know these in our cells. And when we work with the tuning forks, we overlay it with Eastern medicine, and we work with some of the more ancient vessels, which are called the embryonic vessels or the strange flows. Some people call them the psychic vessels, but they were used by the Taoist masters to connect with the more celestial blueprint, because it's really our divine self, our immortal embryo. And so we work a lot with those extraordinary vessels, and there's 8 of them, and we say the 8 is, the infinity loop, and it's the connector between heaven, earth, and humanity. Humanity is in the center. We're nourished by earth and transformed through heaven, and it's for us to mediate those energies. Okay. So the tuning forks are kind of the portable part of the system.
Yes.
This is the Mars-Venus fifth.
We talked a little about is an opening in music. It creates a beautiful balance and opening. And we're using Mars and Venus a lot with autism. We have some formal studies going on now with autism, with ADHD. They're being used in school systems on kids that are highly creative, but a little bit overactive and they can't be grounded. So we take that kind of Martian energy that's adrenal and a little bit overpassionate sometimes and ground it with the beauty and the balance of Venus and still keep the opening. So we may use that on particular points, kidney points, or we may use it directly on the heart chakra. We may use it, what we call, to balance the hemispheres of the brains. There's a particular point called the upper star. Or we may use it to access what's called the crystal palace, which is kind of the oval crystal center of our brain. That includes the thalamus, hypothalamus, pituitary. And so by this geometry of using God's mouth in the back and what we call this brow center or yin tang, is the geometry itself creates a perfect fifth. And then when we have this other sympathy of this beautiful balanced fifth, perfect fifth in music, and the archetypes and correspondences that go with it, we have some powerful medicine.
We also work with the new moon fifth. And this is, if you think about the new moon, new beginnings, getting things moving, cycles, it has a yin quality to it.
And we combine it with the Om, which is the earth traveling through the 4 seasons. And it's a beautiful harmonic, but it's not quite a fifth. So we have many fifths, parallel fifths in the system. But the earth itself has 3 tones. It has the earth year of 365 days, which is more balanced. It has its own sidereal spin, which is 24 hours. So you would think that's a lot more generative and building energy. We call it the chlorophyll fork or coffee.
Chi.
So the chi fork.
Let's bring energy in.
And it's slightly dissonant, so it's pushing toward that fifth. It's actually a diminished fifth. So it's pushing toward that opening and it's creating energy through the dissonance. So we use this to build energy on points that have been heavily researched in Oriental medicine. It's called stomach 36 or 3 mile yang. It's all the yang vessels go through there. And what we do is we know that this point increases immunoglobulins. This is heavily tested. But when we use this chi fork, we stimulate that immunoglobulin production. So it's used a lot, that combination, for cancer support, for chronic fatigue.
When Donna was clinical dean in the acupuncture school in Seattle, she had 14 community clinics that she was responsible for and had a Ryan White grant to do HIV/AIDS work. And some of the people that they were seeing were so critically ill that they really couldn't tolerate the acupuncture needles. And so they worked with the forks and have amazing results using, again, the Earth Day, which we talked about, and the solar seventh to boost the immune function.
Working in the clinics as well, oftentimes as part of Oriental medicine, we use for warming moxibustion, which is mugwort, and we use it on particular points to warm the system and especially the kidneys. And we would often go in clinics where we couldn't use moxa because the smoke would set off the system. And so we would then substitute the sun on the moxa points and almost putting this through our hands like a moxa box. And we're also using this to turn babies that were breech, because one of the classic points is the tip of the little toe with moxa. And when you can't use moxa, we stimulate with the solar seventh. And it was very rewarding to see all of the babies being turned. And of course, we were right there in integrative care with the nurse midwives and with the physicians, so they could do a check immediately to see that the baby was turned. Sometimes, like with a baby turning, it's pretty
Seconds.
immediate. It's seconds. So
In terms of the length of a treatment, Acutonics is being integrated into a spa environment. And in those situations, it might be an add-on to a bodywork session. So someone might have 15 minutes of Acutonics as part of being worked on therapeutically by a massage practitioner. Or it might be combined with an oriental medical treatment where the practitioner might use some needles and some sound. And
or
so
in
it's
body work, where somebody may be working on scar tissue mobilization, with a
Physical
particular
therapy as
physical
well.
therapists love to do that, or even in psychotherapy sessions where they're working with those archetypal patterns and having the client simply listen, which starts everything going. They're connecting with the archetype, they're connecting on those many levels with those sounds and images.
Depth psychology from a real Jungian perspective of understanding how we're influenced by archetypes, by mythologies, by the stories we carry with us, and really working archetypally with people, not even on the physical body, but psycho-spiritually, to listen and to integrate those sounds.
And the babies hear those sounds too, because sound travels 4 times faster in water. We are
70%
water, and the baby is in a water sac. So one of our practitioners who does a lot of work in pediatrics and in OBGYN actually works in the field with the babies who just love the Om sound. Sure, because we're dealing with an ancient form of medicine that's 5,000 years old, Oriental medicine. So we're using the maps that those ancients gave us, which are the meridians, just like there's star streams and maps in the skies and cartography on Earth. This is our cartography. And so these were what the ancients laid out for us. And the older body of evidence is that acupuncture meridians are kind of electromagnetic circuitry. But I think that a lot of people like to think of it like that because we kind of are in a yang age, where everything is gotta go, and we don't really appreciate that yin, and everything is just kind of mechanical, gates, acupuncture gates, you open them and close them, and they're just latching, and shuttering. And the newer thinking is that, no, it's not like that at all. It's very yin, in fact, that the more recent findings are that acupuncture meridians are actually waterways. And so if you think about the beauty of that, when we connect to these points on the body into those waterways, and they have a particular function, this is the way we get into the meridian, we use points. Then they're moving in the waterway and moving 4 times faster. It's affecting the system, on a global level.
One of the intervals that Donna mentioned was she was talking about the zodiac third interval, which is very meditative. It represents Earth traveling through the entire zodiacal system, which is a 25,920-year cycle. And so it has both a dispersive and a gathering of wisdom quality, if you think about something taking 25,920 years. And so that is being used clinically in both the middle and particularly in the low frequency to break up scar tissue. And we have studies that show a woman whose hand was like this and she had a big ropey scar that it softened, and she can now open and close her hand just by working with the low zodiac fork over the scar and working in areas off the body. Sometimes scars are so sensitive that you don't want to work directly on the scar, but you work over the scar. And again, we're seeing that scar tissue, something that people have had great difficulty with doing anything for, that it can start to soften and shift and change.
And increase mobility.
And again, so that's
increased mobility, and those are the things we can measure through range of motion. But what we can't measure, and this is probably my pet peeve with the research, which everybody wants to use the Western biomedical model, we need quantum research. What happens? Yes, we may get more mobility, and that hand might have opened, but why? I believe that scar carries cellular memory, and that it contains the trauma, the initial trauma. And what happens when we're working with these frequencies is that trauma is getting released somewhere, and there's a deeper level of healing and a higher layer of consciousness that an individual moves toward. Now, these are the things that we have to find out how to measure. Okay, so harmonics. I mean, the tuning forks and the intervals are more of a pure tone. We don't, unless it's very low, we sometimes will hear an overtone of a third or a fifth, sometimes an 11th. But we have actually 3 octaves and 4 octaves of the tuning fork. So we have kind of the harmonics are the middle, the low, and the high. And we might start at the mid-range, and if we see that we need to go into a deeper level, whether it's emotional or we have something like a really entrapped nerve for sciatic pain, and we go to the lower octaves that have a little bit more vibration and power. And then sometimes if somebody's too sensitive, we may work with the high frequency in the etheric field. So those are the 3 layers of the harmonics. We also work with Tibetan bowls and bells, and we put those directly on the body. And those have incredible harmonics and a lot of overtones and undertones. And the beauty of laying them on the body is, they cover a bigger span, and they actually are very comforting. We were talking with one of our colleagues, which was Mitchell Gaynor, and he's an oncologist in New York. And he uses these Tibetan bowls made of the 7 sacred metals, and has incredible, phenomenal results with his cancer patients. And he doesn't really know how they work, but what he knows is miracles happen and people get better. And, and sometimes we just murder to dissect. It's one of those things where we have to come up with the research that could actually speak to those bigger issues, like the issues of miracles and quantum, going from a class 4 cancer to, cancer-free. So but anyway, the harmonics in those are very profound. And then we get to another level of harmonics, which I mentioned before, are these gongs with these huge sound envelopes. And, those are tuned to specific frequencies like the forks, but you will get a whole range of harmonics, sub and hyperharmonics. You'll get squealing, you'll get dimensional fields, and so it's geometry. I think it's sound taken to such a quantum level that I'm just waiting for the new equipment that can actually test these things or to do studies. But we know they're profound instruments. We've been working with them for 15, 17 years now. And those are what we want the sanctuaries for, and those are what we want to do the bigger healing, the group healings, the community healings, the healing of the planet. Recreate those celestial harmonies on Earth. Start within ourselves, move to our families, our communities, have some new medical models that we can give group treatments.
I think the human body really is a resonator. If you think of, as Donna mentioned, sound traveling 4 times faster in water. So we are a resonator for sound, and it's why we are so negatively impacted by jackhammers in the street, or loud raucous music sometimes can just put us on edge. Why soothing music, peaceful music makes us feel at ease and come more into center and feel more grounded. And so if you think about the impact that music has on us, and then think physiologically how, by working with the acupuncture meridians to access these waterways in the body, we're really affecting change on a physical level.
So, if we look at the body and look at the universe, we'll find it is, one. I am the universe, and the universe is me.